In May 2025, on an ordinary street corner in Westbrook, a large bag was found. Inside were 2 severed hands, nails still painted red. I am Lieutenant Mark Owens, the head of the Homicide Investigation Team of the Criminal Police Department. In 12 years in the field, I have witnessed all kinds of crimes. But this case has kept me awake for many nights. 7:30 a.m. on May 16, 2025, a sanitation worker was sweeping the streets in Westbrook District, near the overpass. When he approached the embankment, less than 5 meters from the bridge, he discovered a large yellow package tied tightly with white nylon rope. For a sanitation worker, seeing discarded packages was a daily occurrence. The worker squatted down and opened the first layer of rope and nylon. There were more layers inside. When he reached the last layer, he found a white handbag that looked new. Curious, he opened it and discovered a black bag underneath. When he opened the last layer, 2 pale arms with red nails appeared. When I arrived at the scene, the sanitation worker was still shaking. We quickly cordoned off the area and sent out a search party. The forensic team received the body and initially determined that the arm belonged to a woman, and based on its length, the victim was estimated to be about 1.55 to 1.6 meters tall. Based on the elasticity of the skin and the lack of signs of decomposition, we determined that the arm had been dismembered for less than 30 hours. That is, between 8 p.m. on May 14th and 2 a.m. on May 15th. An important detail: on the victim's little finger there was a scar that had formed long ago. I stood there looking at the arms on the examination table, trying to understand the mind of the perpetrator. Dismembering and dumping the body was an act of concealment to cover up the crime. That was understandable. But why dump it in such a visible place? I presented my team at the task force meeting with 3 possibilities. First, the perpetrator intentionally dropped the body in plain sight to challenge us. Second, he accidentally dropped it while moving the body parts to the disposal site. And third, the person who dumped the body parts was not familiar with the area. After almost a day of discussion, we agreed on the third hypothesis. The perpetrator was not a local, not familiar with the roads, at least not from Westbrook County. Maybe he thought there was a river below the viaduct, so he threw the package down to let the water carry it away, not knowing that there was a road underneath. That a day later, we received a report from Maplewood, about 22 miles from Westbrook. Workers at a construction site discovered a large black plastic bag that emitted a foul odor. When they opened it, they found 6 layers of plastic bags inside, and on the last layer was a bloodstained quilt. Inside the quilt was the upper body of a woman. No head, no limbs. Local police contacted us as soon as they learned of the discovery of the arm in Westbrook. The packaging, multiple layers of plastic and twine, was identical. However, we cannot be certain that the 2 remains belonged to the same person. They were found a day apart, in 2 different locations, and had no common joints. We decided to use DNA testing, an expensive and imperfect method at the time, but the only way to be sure. If it was the same person, we would be focusing on one victim. If it was 2 different people, we might be dealing with a serial killer. While waiting for the DNA results, we spread out our forces to check the routes connecting the 2 dump sites, hoping to find the rest of the body. On the other hand, we provided information to the press, especially emphasizing the scar on the little finger, hoping that someone would recognize it. After the information was widely published, an elderly couple named Lambert from Houston came forward to report. They said that their adopted daughter, Julia Hart, 34, also had a scar on her right little finger. According to the story, 10 years ago, they helped Julia when she came from the countryside to the city to find work. Because they had no children, they adopted her. Later, Julia got a job elsewhere with a better salary, so she moved out to live on her own, but still came back to visit often. Recently, they have not seen her return. We went to the Lamberts' house to look for fingerprints, but found nothing but theirs. However, through investigation, we learned that Julia had had surgery at a hospital in Chicago. This was a major breakthrough. At the hospital, we found Julia Hart's medical records, along with a surgical waiver, a document that contained the patient's fingerprints. When compared to the prints on the victim's hands, the results were a perfect match. The victim was Julia Hart. DNA results later confirmed that the 2 body parts found in Westbrook and Maplewood belonged to the same person. Julia Hart was born in DeWitt County, a remote and poor area in the southern United States. She had been married once and had a daughter. After her divorce, at the age of 24, she went to Houston alone to seek opportunities. Initially, she was scammed out of all her money, but luckily, she met Mr. and Mrs. Lambert who helped her. While working as a manual laborer in Houston, Julia was discovered by a dance instructor. With her well-proportioned figure and pretty face, Julia quickly worked at many high-end nightclubs in the city. Her final destination was the Velvet Room Club, Chicago's most famous nightclub, opened by an American businessman with a capacity of up to 300 people. Here, Julia went by the stage name Crystal. Unlike other dancers who often agreed to go out with regular customers after work, Julia mainly interacted with wealthy jewelry businessmen. She became an intermediary between jewelry businessmen and dancers and customers who wanted to buy rare jewelry. We started investigating Julia's relationships. A hostess who was quite close to her at the Velvet Room Club said that on May 13th, 3 days before the arm was discovered, she saw someone pick Julia up at the entrance of the club. This person was Vincent Carter, a regular at the club, and disappeared the next day. We arrived at Vincent Carter's residence. The maid said that the boss had just come back and asked him to pack his clothes and leave in a hurry, without saying where he was going. There were no identification papers, bank cards, or money in the house. A week after Julia's identity was made public, Vincent Carter returned and contacted us. He said he'd been Julia's best friend for many years and that he had taught her how to do business with expensive jewelry. He himself did the same job. They were only close friends because he was gay and had a boyfriend who lived in Phoenix. According to Vincent, after picking Julia up from the nightclub that day, the two went out to eat until around 2 p.m. Julia asked him to take her to the Grand Rose Hotel in Midtown to meet a jeweler. After dropping Julia off in front of the hotel, he returned home and received a call saying that his boyfriend had broken his leg in an accident, so he rushed to Phoenix. Vincent Carter's alibi was clear and verified. However, the information about the Grand Rose Hotel was an important clue. We quickly went to the Grand Rose Hotel to verify. Although guests do not need to give their real names when booking a room, the hotel staff recorded the license plate numbers of guests arriving by car. After eliminating unrelated people, we discovered that a black car had been parked at the hotel on May 13th. The car is owned by a car rental company that records the renter's information based on the national ID. The renter, Kenneth Miles, rented the car on the morning of May 13th and had not returned it at the time of the investigation. When we looked up information about Kenneth Miles, we were shocked. This was a man with a long criminal record. At 47 years old, Kenneth had committed many crimes from petty theft to robbery, rape, fraud, and property appropriation. In 1984, for armed robbery, he was sentenced to life in prison. However, in early 1991, during an amnesty, his sentence was reduced and he was released after nearly 10 years in prison. We found Kenneth's rented black car parked in the Lincoln Park parking lot in Riverside County. In the car, we recovered 2 pawn notes in Kenneth Miles' name. One from a Chicago pawn shop dated May 14th, the day after the murder, pawning a diamond ring for $1,700, and one from a St. Louis pawn shop dated May 18th, pawning a women's Rolex watch for $12,500. With these facts, we had grounds to suspect Kenneth Miles, but not enough evidence to identify him as the culprit. After several days of searching, we discovered Kenneth was in Phoenix and invited him to the police station for questioning. At the investigation agency, Kenneth Miles said that he knew Julia Hart but was not involved in her death. He said that the car was rented for a friend named Ray Parker, and that Ray used it and asked Kenneth to return it, but the payment was not due yet. The 2 items pawned, a watch and a diamond ring, were from a friend named Tommy Brooks who asked him to pawn them. Kenneth himself went out with a stripper named Lola from May 11th to 18th, then went to Phoenix alone. We questioned Ray Parker and Tommy Brooks. Both confirmed Kenneth's testimony was correct. Ray said he asked Kenneth to rent a car to meet a business partner to gain trust, and that when he drove to the Grand Rose Hotel, he was there to pick up a girl, not knowing who Julia was. Tommy said that he asked Kenneth to hold his diamond ring and Rolex watch, which he had bought through a smuggler, and he couldn't remember who sold them. It sounds reasonable and has no loopholes, but perhaps it's the first time they lie about valuable branded items and do not know some special features. For example, Rolex watches have their own symbols, a unique series number located next to the dial. These watches, if purchased from an authorized store, will have the buyer's information saved and even updated in the archive every time they are warranted or repaired. The police quickly identified the owner of the watch. Although it was not in Julia Hart's name, the owner confirmed that he had sold it to Julia, with a warranty attached. When we searched Julia's residence, we found a bill of sale and the watch's paperwork, confirming that it belonged to the victim. Similarly, the diamond ring was also confirmed to be Julia's. When we told Ray Parker and Tommy Brooks that these two valuables and the black car were related to a dismemberment murder, they both immediately panicked and changed their statements. They admitted that they were paid $700 by Kenneth Miles to lie, and that they thought it was just a regular robbery and agreed to testify because they were friends. They did not expect to be involved in a gruesome murder. Kenneth's claim that he went out with a stripper named Lola was also a lie. After a period of verification, we could not find anyone named Lola who went with Kenneth. At this point, we had enough evidence to arrest and search Kenneth Miles' home. At Kenneth's rented residence in St. Louis, we discovered a valuable gold necklace with precious stones and a ruby ring, which were later determined to belong to the victim, Julia Hart. In addition, bloodstains were found on the living room floor and bathroom floor, even though they had been scrubbed. Behind the trunk of Kenneth's rented car, which had also been carefully cleaned, we found a small blood stain. Comparing the bloodstains on the car and the bloodstains at Kenneth's house, they were the same blood type as the victim Julia Hart. Faced with undeniable facts and evidence, Kenneth Miles confessed. The story of the case is summarized as follows. Kenneth Miles had just been paroled from prison in 1993. When he was released from prison, he contacted some of his former inmates, occasionally gathering to drink, gamble, and discuss ways to make money. But after thinking about it, he found that robbery was still the fastest way to make money, without needing to invest capital. Kenneth Miles used to be a thief and robber, going in and out of prison on a regular basis. He reviewed his robberies and found that robbing strippers was often easier. They had a lot of money, had sensitive identities, and sometimes when robbed or raped, they did not dare to report it because they were afraid of facing the police. Therefore, he continued to choose strippers as his prey, but this time he planned to think carefully to make it worth it. While hanging out with friends at the famous Velvet Room Club in Chicago, he noticed Julia Hart and determined that she would be his prey because he knew that Julia was a middleman in the jewelry business. He had also learned the jewelry trade in prison. He often went to dance halls to hang out and interact with Julia Hart. He posed as a jeweler and a jewelry middleman to easily approach Julia. After a while, he gained Julia's trust. A few days before the incident, Kenneth Miles came to see Julia and said that someone asked him to help sell a batch of smuggled jewelry that had just arrived at a price lower than the market price, and that if he sold it, he would definitely make a big profit. But he didn't have enough money at the moment, and if Julia could go with him to appraise it and find it suitable, they could pool their money to buy the jewelry, and the profits will be divided proportionally. Julia was immediately excited when she heard this and agreed to go along. On May 12th, he made an appointment with Julia at 2 p.m. on May 13th at the Grand Rose Hotel in Midtown. He made the appointment at the hotel because he knew that smuggled jewelry transactions often took place in such secluded places. This methodical approach did not make Julia suspicious. Kenneth Miles also made a decisive move. He said that in the jewelry smuggling group, there was a person who loved to collect precious stones and would buy whatever he liked, no matter how high the price. He asked Julia if she had any gem-related items to introduce to that person. Because of this statement, Julia brought along a diamond ring, a ruby ring, a stone-encrusted necklace, and a Rolex watch to sell. Kenneth Miles had prepared by hiring a car to go to the Grand Rose Hotel and opening the room. When Julia arrived, he told his friend to give him the key and wait in the room for a moment, while he went to get the goods to bring back. However, after a while, he pretended to go down to the lobby and came back up to tell Julia that he had just called his friend on the other side and learned that the hotel was under guard, meaning the police were watching, so they had to move to another location. Julia agreed to get in the car and go to another location. In fact, the other location was the apartment that Kenneth Miles had rented, located in a 4-story apartment building. It was here that he revealed his true identity as a robber and murdered Julia. From her handbag, he took valuable items that, If not for his scheme, Julia would never have cared at the same time. After successfully committing the crime, he thought of cutting Julia into many parts to easily dispose of the evidence. He bought many plastic bags and a saw to divide the victim into 7 parts and put them in 5 large bags. Next, he put them in the trunk of his car and threw them away on May 14th and 15th. During his confession, he had a detail that made the investigators both angry and shudder. Not only did he dismember the victim, but he also said that while he was doing it, Julia did not close her eyes, but kept staring at him, so he covered Julia's eyes with a piece of cloth. Kenneth Miles gave the following locations for dumping the body. Near the viaduct, he was unfamiliar with the area and thought it was a river. Near construction site, at Grace Hill Cemetery in North Valley, and at Westbridge Bridge, Oregon. He dumped the head and the dismemberment materials in a garbage truck on Glenwood Avenue, heading toward Chicago. The head, when put into the garbage truck, must be transported to the garbage collection area, waiting for the staff to take it to the incinerator to decompose. Although the garbage is not burned on the same day, every day, they work in sequence, but by the time of the investigation, many days have passed. The possibility of finding the garbage containing Julia Hart's head is almost zero. However, upon receiving the notice, the management of the central landfill reported that they could find it and would assist. The reason was that on May 16th, the incinerator broke down and could not be destroyed and needed to be repaired. The repair process kept having problems, and after being repaired, it would break down again. It took a week for it to return to normal. During that time, garbage was still being brought to the landfill every day, one day on top of the other, piling up like a mountain. The capacity of the incinerator remained the same, so the workers were forced to process the garbage from the outside of the pile to the inside, unable to follow the old process. Therefore, the garbage from May 14th was deep inside, not processed. With the help of landfill workers, police found Julia Hart's severed head. Police also went to Grace Hill Cemetery to search for the remains that Kenneth Miles said he had dumped there. After a day of fruitless searching, they decided to return the next day. This time, they searched the slope next to the cemetery, where there were overgrown bushes. There, they found a torn plastic bag, exposing Julia Hart's legs. It is possible that stray dogs had dragged the bag out of the cemetery. Nearly a month later, the police found the last 2 packages in the areas Kenneth Miles had described. Essentially, they had found all the parts of Julia Hart and returned them to her family to take home for burial. At least, they had a complete body. As for the criminal Kenneth Miles, although he confessed the truth about his crime, he still tried to escape the death penalty. For him, who had been sentenced to life in prison but had it reduced to 10 years, he thought that as long as he did not receive the death penalty, he still had a chance. To do that, he changed his tactics many times. Sometimes he changed his testimony, saying that the police tortured and forced him to confess. When that failed, he changed his testimony to another one. He had no intention of robbing and killing Julia Hart. At that time, he just wanted to borrow some money from her. But Julia not only refused, but also cursed and attacked him. So during the struggle, he accidentally did it. He also gave many other versions of his testimony, the purpose of which was to charge him with manslaughter or murder in a state of excitement, self-defense, instinct, in general, not carrying the death penalty. Of course, the court did not accept any of his defenses. Kenneth Miles appealed repeatedly, a total of 6 times, and in all 6 of those trials, the death sentence was upheld. However, Kenneth Miles was not actually executed. At that time, non-governmental organizations were very active and powerful in the United States. These organizations requested that the United States abolish the death penalty throughout its territory. The viewpoint of these organizations was to eliminate the death penalty from the law for reasons related to human rights, ensuring humanity, avoiding unjust deaths. Once a wrongful death has occurred and the death penalty has been executed, there is no chance of correction. Due to pressure from NGOs to abolish the death penalty, the federal government has neither abolished nor implemented it. The U.S. Department of Justice has not signed any death warrants for the time being. All prisoners on death row are in prison awaiting execution. Kenneth Miles is also in prison awaiting execution. By 2012, unable to wait any longer, Kenneth Miles succumbed to his illness and died in prison. A fitting end for a man who had committed a heinous crime. This case is a reminder once again. One may not have the heart to harm others, but one must have the heart to guard against others. Especially in today's era, where gossip is everywhere, and good and bad are mixed together. In my experience, truly rich people are less likely to show off. Everyone has greed, but the lower the greed, the more likely they are to keep themselves safe. This case also shows that crimes can escalate. Initially starting from small crimes, they eventually become huge crimes, becoming inhumane murderers. When we have successfully committed a crime, our psychology will make us feel that it is normal, often not considering a crime. What is even more dangerous is that if we continue like this, the level and intensity will gradually increase, and then we will become a devil without knowing it. Kenneth Miles was pardoned once, escaped from prison, but still did not repent, continued to return to the path of sin, and became more reckless and cruel, eventually harming others and himself. Once again returning to prison and leaving in humiliation and curses of the world. We all make mistakes, but there are mistakes that can be corrected, and there are mistakes that once committed, there is no chance to correct them. The winner is the one who knows how to use morality as the foundation to overcome his own demons. The Julia Hart case was not the first, nor the last, to involve dismemberment. In my work, I have studied many similar cases, and I have found that most of them have certain things in common. First, the motive for a crime is often money or emotion. In the Julia Hart case, it was clear that the main motive was money. Kenneth Miles had deliberately planned to rob the victim of her property. Second, dismemberment is often done after a crime has been committed to conceal the crime. However, this often makes the case more serious and makes the perpetrator face a heavier sentence. Third, no matter how carefully criminals try to cover up their crimes, they often leave traces behind. In the case of Kenneth Miles, despite his best efforts to clean the crime scene in his car, he was unable to completely remove the blood. From a criminal psychology perspective, Kenneth Miles is a typical case of a recidivist who is unable to reintegrate into society. After being pardoned and released from prison, instead of trying to rebuild his life, he returned to his old criminal ways. This can be explained by several factors. First, the prison environment did not help him to successfully reform. Second, after being released from prison, he did not have the professional skills to make an honest living. Third, and perhaps most importantly, he was accustomed to a criminal lifestyle and considered it the easiest way to make money. Kenneth's mentality also showed a lack of conscience and morality. He felt no remorse or regret for his actions, but was only concerned with how to escape punishment or reduce his sentence. This was evident in his constant changing of testimony and his repeated appeals. In this case, forensic science played a decisive role. From identifying the victim through fingerprints to detecting blood stains in the killer's home and car, it all relied on forensic techniques. In particular, the identification of the victim's valuables through the serial numbers of Rolex watches is a testament to the advancement of technology and management systems in a luxury goods industry. This also reminds us that, in today's technological age, it is becoming increasingly difficult to conceal crimes. The Julia Hart case also offers valuable lessons for investigative work. First, identifying the victim is the first and most important step. In this case, discovering Julia Hart's identity opened up new lines of investigation, leading to the discovery of the killer. Second, coordination between agencies and local authorities is essential. Without the coordination between Westbrook and Maplewood police, the case would not have been solved so quickly. Third, it is extremely important to carefully examine the testimony of witnesses and suspects. In this case, the police did not immediately believe the testimony of Ray Parker and Tommy Brooks, but conducted a thorough verification, thereby discovering the fraud. During the investigation of this case, many strange coincidences occurred. It was a lucky coincidence that the incinerator broke down at a crucial moment, leaving the victim's head intact. Similarly, the discovery of the victim's legs on the slope next to the cemetery was also a difficult coincidence to explain. These coincidences, although scientifically unexplainable, contributed significantly to solving the case. However, from a scientific perspective, we need to understand that these coincidences can be explained by statistical probability. In thousands of cases, It is not unusual for a few strange coincidences to occur. During the investigation, we learn a lot about the life of the victim, Julia Hart. She was born into a poor family in DeWitt County, a remote county in the southern United States. From a young age, she had to work to support her family. At the age of 18, she married a local man and gave birth to a baby girl. However, the marriage was not a happy one and ended in divorce after 6 years. After the divorce, Julia left her daughter with her ex-husband and his family while she went to Houston to find work. In Houston, she met Mr. and Mrs. Lambert, an elderly couple with no children. They helped her through her early struggles and later adopted her. Although they were not legally married, their relationship was deep. Julia visited them often and provided them with money. With her good looks and lively personality, Julia quickly found work in dance halls. From an ordinary dancer, she gradually became a famous figure in the dance hall world in Chicago. In addition to her work at the nightclub, Julia also worked as a middleman in the sale of rare jewelry. This job brought her a good income, but it was also the very thing that led to her tragic death. Based on the testimony of witnesses and the perpetrator, we have reconstructed the last days of Julia Hart's life. On May 12, 2025, Julia works as usual at the Velvet Room Club. After her shift, she meets Kenneth Miles, whom she believes to be a friend and business partner. Kenneth offers her a lucrative deal involving smuggled jewelry and asks her to meet him the next day. On May 13th, Julia went to work as usual. After her shift, she was picked up by Vincent Carter, a close friend, and taken to lunch. Then, at Julia's request, Vincent took her to the Grand Rose Hotel in Midtown to meet Kenneth. At the hotel, Kenneth Miles took Julia to his room under the pretext of waiting for a business partner to deliver the goods. He then lied that the hotel was under police surveillance and needed to change locations. Julia, unsuspecting, agreed to go with him. Kenneth took Julia to the apartment he had rented earlier. There, he revealed his true identity as a robber, murdered Julia, and robbed her. He then dismembered her body and disposed of it in various locations. The process of solving the Julia Hart case is a testament to the tenacity and meticulousness of the investigative process. From discovering the victim's arms, to identifying the victim, finding the perpetrator, and finally gathering enough evidence to convict, each step required close coordination between multiple agencies and individuals. In particular, identifying victims through fingerprints on surgical consent forms was a major breakthrough, demonstrating the importance of storing and managing medical records. Similarly, identifying the owner of a Rolex watch through its serial number is also a testament to the advancement of technology and management systems in the luxury goods industry. During the investigation of this case, we encountered many difficulties. Firstly, the dismemberment and disposal of bodies in many different places has made it difficult to find and collect all the victim's body parts. Second, the fact that the perpetrator tried to erase traces by cleaning the crime scene, and the car also made it difficult to collect evidence. Fortunately, no matter how hard he tried, the perpetrator could not completely erase the bloodstains. Third, the fact that the perpetrator had accomplices willing to give false testimony also made it difficult to verify the testimony. However, thanks to meticulousness and perseverance, we discovered this deception. The Julia Hart case offers many valuable lessons. First, for the investigation, this case emphasizes the importance of identifying victims, coordination between agencies and localities, and carefully examining the statements of witnesses and suspects. Second, for crime prevention, this case shows the importance of managing and reintegrating people with criminal records into society. If Kenneth Miles had been helped to reintegrate into society after his release from prison, he probably would not have returned to crime. Third, for individuals, this case reminds us of the importance of being vigilant and protecting ourselves. Julia Hart placed too much trust in Kenneth Miles, a man she had only known for a short time, and that led to unfortunate consequences. Motive for the crime. Kenneth Miles' motive was clear: money. He had deliberately planned to rob Julia Hart. He knew that Julia was a middleman in the sale of rare jewelry, so he approached her as someone in the business to build trust. After gaining her trust, he planned to rob her. He lured Julia with her most valuable items, then took her to a secluded place to commit the crime. It is worth noting that Although his initial motive was robbery, he did not stop there. He murdered Julia and then dismembered her body, showing his cruelty and lack of conscience. Kenneth Miles' method of committing the crime showed careful calculation and preparation. He rented a car to travel, rented a hotel room to build trust, and rented a private apartment to carry out the act.